The wind howled through the charred remains of the village, carrying ash and the stink of the dead. Merritt crouched behind a splintered cart, arms wrapped tight around her knees. Her mother had stopped breathing 2 days ago, her face blackened, and eyes bulging from fever. Her brothers were gone, dragged by soldiers or eaten by crows. Hunger gnawed, but fear clenched harder. She had learned silence. Coughing could get you burned. They found her at dusk. Soldiers in reddened black tabards, sent to clear the infected woods. One pulled her up by the wrist, inspecting her like spoiled meat. She didn't fight. Where would she run? One muttered, "She's clean, take her." They tied her wrists and lead her to a wagon filled with coughing children and empty-eyed women at the estate. Servants whispered as she was dragged inside the stone hall. Baron Rowell stood like a statue in front of a painted shrine, candles flickering around a girl's portrait. His face cracked when he saw Merritt. "Isabeau," he said, voice hollow. The servant beside him paled. "My lord, she's just a village girl." Rowell waved him silent. "The same eyes, the same mouth. She's returned." Merritt said nothing. The guards cut her bindings. A maid approached with trembling hands and began removing her rags. Another brought warm water and soap that smelled of lavender. She flinched, but they scrubbed her raw, cut her hair, poured oils down her back. They forced her into a gown with embroidered lilies, far too tight around her ribs. When she tried to speak her name, a nun slapped her cheek. "You are Isabeau," the nun whispered. By nightfall, she stood beside the Baron in a candlelit hall, stomach churning with sweetmeats and wine. Her name was gone. Raoul introduced her to visitors as his miracle. The tale was whispered across the estate. God had returned his daughter in another vessel to show mercy in a time of wrath. A monk blessed her forehead. Peasants knelt in front of her. "Touch them," Raoul ordered. "They believe in you." She touched a woman's hand. It trembled. A kiss was pressed to her palm. A child began to cry. Each day after, the rituals deepened. She ate alone at a silver table. Her chamber was locked from the outside. Servants changed her dress, painted her face, and brushed her hair into the exact style of the girl in the portrait. "Don't smile too wide," one whispered. Lady Isabeau never did. The portrait watched from every room. A chapel was built in the courtyard. Her face, sketched by the steward, was carved into wood as a living saint. No one called her Merritt. No one asked who she was, only who she looked like. On the 7th night, she tried to sneak from her room, barefoot on cold stone. A guard caught her outside the servants' quarters. She begged. He blinked once, then raised his torch and led her back without a word. The next morning, Raoul appeared in her chamber. He didn't yell. He knelt, held her hands, and whispered about dreams, visions of fire, voices of angels, the smell of lilies. "You're a gift," he said. "Don't run from what you are." She nodded. She didn't believe him, but she understood the rules. Later, she watched another girl be dragged from the kitchens, caught stealing salted pork. They cut off 2 fingers. No screams, just the slap of blood on stone. No one looked at Merritt afterward. They bowed. In the winter, she stood beside Raoul at a feast, dressed in fur and velvet. Her skin itched. Her eyes stung from the smoke. Someone toasted 2 miracles. Raoul smiled, proud and pale. A servant girl spilled wine on Merritt's slipper. Raoul struck her across the face with the hilt of his knife. The hall went silent. No one helped the girl. That night, Merritt looked at herself in the mirror. The face was hers, but the name, the hands, the posture, those belonged to the dead girl. Her voice was gone. Even her dreams spoke in another tongue now. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands, and whispered the only word she remembered clearly. "Merritt." A maid opened the door and stepped in, heard the whisper. The maid's face hardened. By morning, the word was scrubbed from the walls, the bed linens changed, a new rosary placed on the pillow. The priest came too. "Bless her again. Saint Isabeau," he said. "Marit." Tay said nothing. The bell tolled before sunrise. Merritt sat upright in bed before it finished, already dressed in the blue wool gown laid out the night before. A servant entered without knocking, poured cold water into the basin, and stepped back. No words. Words were unnecessary. She washed in silence, hands stiff with cold, and dried herself with the same cloth as always, rough linen that scratched like nettles. The nun arrived next, Sister Agnes, thin, sharp, always carrying the little whip of birch. Merritt followed her through damp corridors, stone echoing underfoot. The morning meal was dry bread and watered ale, served in a room with no windows. A guard stood at the door, always the same one. He never looked her in the eye. After prayers, she stitched. Hours of embroidery, her fingers raw from the needle. Patterns she didn't choose. Isabeau's samplers had to be copied precisely, even the mistakes. Aline watched her closely. Any change, and the cloth would be torn and burned. Start again. The castle stank. Waste buckets under stairs. Rats in the corners. Lice on the pillows. Merritt scratched at her scalp until it bled. She was told to stop fidgeting. Isabeau was composed, refined, pure. Every 5th day, she was made. Too fast. She knelt in the chapel, stomach hollow, while monks chanted Latin she couldn't understand. Her knees bruised against stone. If she faltered, Agnes whispered, "Suffer with grace. It is God's will." When she passed out once, they called it a sign of divine devotion. The Baron wept with joy. She was not allowed outside. Her skin grew pale. Her hair was combed with oil each morning. They made her sit under the portrait and study it. "Notice the posture," said the steward. "You're slouching again." When she asked to walk in the courtyard, Raoul denied her. The world is diseased. This house is holy. Sometimes she heard screams from the lower chambers. Other girls punished for disobedience. Once, she saw a boy her age scrubbing the steps with a torn shirt. His fingers bled. Their eyes met for a moment before Sister Agnes struck her wrist with the birch. Look down, always down. Her chamber pot was emptied twice a day by a scullery girl who never spoke. She had no lock on the inside. At night, she heard the key turn and slide into the guard's belt. There was no privacy. The maid held her gown up when she relieved herself. When she cried the first time, she was told, Isabeau never wept. Her meals were taken in the hall, seated next to the Baron, who recited psalms over each dish. She ate sparingly. Vomiting was punished. One night she dared to say she was full. He stared for a long time. Isabeau loved honeyed duck, he said the next morning. No breakfast. During one feast, she had to play a lute, recite a verse. Her hands shook. The strings broke. The guests laughed softly. Raoul did not. She knelt for penance until her knees bled. The steward recorded every detail in the household ledger. Isabeau's failures, rewritten. Only Thomel offered kindness. Mute, limping, he left small gifts: dried berries, a feather, a carved mouse. No one else acknowledged her as anything but the Baron's illusion. Aline once muttered under her breath, another one in a dead girl's dress. Merritt asked what she meant. Aline walked away. In the bath, a copper tub dragged in weakly. She was scrubbed with coarse salt. Her body inspected for moles and bruises. Any mark that wasn't on Isabeau's body, as remembered by her father, was considered a blemish of truth. A mole behind her knee had to be cut. The wound festered. No physician came. She was given ashes mixed with vinegar. She dreamed of her village trees, smoke, her brother's whistle. She woke gagging. Dreams were forbidden. Sister Agnes told her saints dream only of heaven. "Confess your wicked thoughts," she ordered. Merritt said nothing. The birch returned. When she bled her first blood, it was called a miracle. Raoul ordered her confined for 3 days. A time of transformation, he said. She bled onto the silk sheets. A maid burned them. She stopped speaking. It made everything easier. When they whispered Isabeau, she turned her head and smiled. When the monks chanted, she folded her hands. When Raoul cried before the statue, she kissed his hand. Inside, she vanished. No one called her Merit, not even in whispers. One night, Thomo pressed something into her hand, a stone, smoothed by a river. She held it for hours. It was the first thing she had touched that wasn't Isabeau's. It didn't belong here, neither did she, but she stayed. Ate what they gave, wore what they gave, smiled when told, and every morning, she woke up in someone else's skin. The bishop arrived without warning. His cloak dragged across the flagstones, soaked in dust and judgment. He walked the estate like a man already certain of the sin he would uncover. Servants bowed. The baron greeted him with forced warmth, offering wine and tales of miracles. The bishop listened without smiling. Merit was summoned. She entered the great hall in a new gown, white silk stitched with gold thread. Her hands trembled. The bishop studied her face, her posture, her silence. Then he turned to the baron. "This is not your daughter," he said. Raoul laughed, but it was brittle. "She has returned through divine mercy." The bishop responded, flatly, "Then let her prove it." A week later, the trial began. It was called a test of purity. If she were chosen by God, she would pass untouched. If she failed, the sin was hers. 2 monks brought iron bars, heated in the courtyard furnace. She was stripped to her shift, hands bound. The crowd stood silent, servants, guards, even a line, their faces still as stone. She was forced to walk across the burning irons. The pain swallowed everything. She screamed once, then bit her lip until it bled. Her feet blistered and peeled. When she collapsed, a monk pulled her to the end. Raoul watched unmoving. When it was over, the bishop nodded to his men. The illusion ends. She was dragged back to her chamber. No food, no water. The wounds festered. Fever came. In the night, she heard whispers outside her door, debates, arguments, and finally, silence. The next morning, the baron came alone. He didn't speak at first, just stared at her, eyes hollow. Then he knelt beside her bed. "You were everything," he whispered, "and now, you are not even that." He stood and left. The lock turned. The next day, her gowns were taken, replaced with coarse linen. Her chamber stripped of candles, portraits, brushes, even the rosary was gone. She was moved to the lower quarters, where the walls dripped and no light entered. A former plague cellar. Mold clung to the corners. Rats scratched in the walls. She was given gruel once a day. No more guards, no nuns. Just a pail for waste and straw for bedding. When she tried to call out, no one answered. The wounds on her feet oozed pus. She wrapped them in her shift. Thomel never came again. Aline did, once. Brought her a small flask of wine and left without a word. Merit drank it too quickly, and vomited. Her thoughts blurred. Time collapsed. She began whispering her name into the stone. Merit, Merit, until her voice cracked. She carved it with a shard of broken bowl, slow and deliberate. Each letter scraped into the wall until her fingers bled. They forgot her, or pretended to. One night, she heard distant shouts. Fire, maybe. Chaos above. Smoke filtered through the cracks in the stone. She crawled to the door, but it remained shut. Her chamber filled with heat. She pounded once, twice. No response. Then silence. She survived the fire. Barely days passed. Then hands pulled her from the dark. Not gentle, not cruel, just routine. She was cleaned, given a black robe, and taken to the bishop's men. Her face was veiled. The verdict. Deception. The story, now rewritten. She was not a miracle. She was a peasant who had tempted a grieving noble into blasphemy. They needed no trial. The bishop declared her unclean, a stain, not worth execution. Just removal. She was marched to a distant priory. No name, just silence. She would serve under penance, sweeping floors, tending lepers, scrubbing chamber pots. No one would speak to her unless spoken to. She was told she had been granted mercy. Most like her were drowned or burned. Before leaving the estate, she passed the ruined chapel. Her carved image, once displayed, lay in splinters. A dog pissed on the fallen wood. The portrait of Isabeau was gone. Raoul had fled days ago, stripped of land and title. The estate would be sold. No one mentioned the girl who replaced a dead one. As she walked behind the monks, barefoot and limping, she passed the village where she'd first been captured. Nothing remained but graves and weeds. She no longer prayed. She no longer dreamed. But in her sleeve, she still carried the stone Thomel once gave her. It reminded her of water, movement, something that did not belong here, something that might have floated away. The priory was perched on a wind-beaten cliff, gray against gray skies. Merritt arrived in silence, led by monks who spoke only when necessary. She was assigned no name, only a task: sweep the stone floors of the infirmary, feed the sick, wash blood and bile from linens. No one asked where she came from. No one cared. She was simply another girl made silent by punishment. The other penitents were like ghost-spent women with hollow cheeks, some missing fingers, others with skin pocked by old pox. They didn't speak unless forced. Laughter was unknown. Meals were taken in silence. Porridge in chipped bowls, sour bread, stale water. Discipline was enforced, not with whips, but with absence of comfort, of kindness, of identity. She swept, she scrubbed, she carried night soil out to the edge of the cliff, dumped it with the others, and walked back barefoot. Her feet never fully healed. They split again with each frost. Still, she never complained. She had learned the price of attention. Once a week, she was required to confess before the priory's elder. She knelt on cold stone and was asked what sins she bore. She said nothing. Her silence was accepted as guilt. She was marked for eat a black thread stitched into her sleeve. It grew longer each week. The stone from Thomel stayed hidden in her. Shift for a time, until one of the sisters found it during laundry inspection. She was beaten for vanity. No possessions, the sister said. The stone was tossed into the sea. She stopped mourning it. The loss became like everything else, quiet and expected. Winter brought sickness. The priory filled with moaning bodies. Plague, again. The monks whispered prayers, burned incense, sealed doors. Merritt was tasked with tending the infected. She watched them die, one by one, eyes clouded, mouths foaming. She felt no horror, only the dull ache of repetition. She did not fall sick. Eventually, even the elder died. The priory thinned. Food ran low. Duties blurred. Still, she worked. No one noticed when she stopped answering to orders. No one noticed when she didn't speak for days. She was another silent figure moving through a silent ruin. One morning, she awoke to find the doors unbarred, the halls empty. The sea howled, below, louder than usual. She stepped outside and walked until the wind burned her face. At the edge of the cliff, she saw the empty sky, the waves smashing rocks below. She did not jump. She returned to her cot and waited. Weeks later, travelers passed through, searching for survivors. They found her tending the fire, stacking dried fish. When they asked her name, she gave none. One man asked if she had been a nun. She shook her head. A ghost. Then, he muttered. They left without pressing further. Years passed without measure. She never left the priory, never aged in memory. Her hands grew worn, her back hunched, but her face was still quiet, still blank. One day, she stopped rising. No illness, no injury, just stillness. They buried her in the unmarked field behind the chapel, where weeds grew thick, and names were never spoken. No record was made. No one remembered her village, or the estate, or the dead girl whose face she wore. No one remembered the child who became a symbol, then a lie, then nothing at all. Years later, a new abbot restored the priory. Records. He found a gap 2 decades missing from the ledger. No cause noted, no names. Just the word purgatio, written once in the margin, in the ruins of the old estate. A scholar traced the myth of Isabeau the saint. He found conflicting stories. Some claimed she healed the sick, others that she vanished in flames. No one knew the truth. Most assumed it was legend. No portraits survived. No relics. Only a faded piece of embroidery, preserved in a noble archive. It showed a lily bent at the stem. The scholar moved on. There were greater stories to tell: kings, generals, martyrs. Forgotten girls were of no consequence. In time, the place where she lay became pasture. Sheep grazed among bones. The wind swept over the stones, humming through cracks. And somewhere, beneath the soil, a name was buried that had once meant something to someone. Marit. It was never written, never spoken, but for a moment it had existed, and then it was gone.